So today what we're going to talk about is production possibilities. And instead of talking about this starting with the traditional way where you'll get it in a college economics class, we're going to talk about guns and butter or capital versus consumer goods. I want this to be something that you can actually relate to and understand. So we're going to talk about the choices that you make, and we're going to start by simply reviewing a couple of realities. And so these are things you should be aware of. But number one, in economics, we're always talking about scarcity. Scarcity exists all the time in life because, as always, we want too many things, and there isn't enough of stuff that we have to go around. So in the case of this lecture, all we're going to think about is time. Remember, I don't want us thinking about money at all until we tell you to think about money. Once you understand economics in terms of human behavior, then applying monetary decisions become easy. So you don't have enough time. There are 24 hours in a day. That is fixed. There is nothing you can do to get more. We've talked about this a bunch, the idea that time is the single most valuable commodity, the most valuable resource that exists. And so because of this, we have to make choices. You have 24 hours in a day. How are you going to choose to spend them? And that's going to make a big difference in your life. We talked also about these costs that go with it. And so every choice you make is going to lead to a trade-off. Remember that the choices you make, the real cost of them are paid in the future. The idea of the decisions you make today are going to have long-lasting ramifications towards potential options in the future. So this leads us to dealing with these three essential questions that every country must ask. And I want us to think about this instead of just the countries that have to answer them, but think about this for you, for your life. You're a 15-year-old kid, and you are trying to figure out why school matters. You're trying to figure out what you want to do with your time. When you're a senior, you're going to have, one semester left, and you're going to be trying to figure out, what do I do with my life? So the first question you're going to say is, what am I going to do? That's what to make. And we're going to talk about that in this lecture. And when you go into more advanced economics classes, there's a lot of ways that we're going to answer this. But for our purposes, we're simply going to say a PPC, a production possibility curve, is going to help us make that decision. Secondly, we're going to ask, how are we going to make it? And later on, we're going to talk about the difference between a command and a market economy. And so just keep that in the back of your mind for the future. At some point, you're going to have to answer, well, if this is what I'm going to do, that's what to make. Well, how am I going to do it? And the third is, for whom am I going to do it? So who's going to benefit from what it is that I'm doing? Who's going to reap the rewards? And again, we'll talk about that once we get back into talking about economic systems in command versus market. So we have possibilities, and every hour of the day is something that we could spend doing something. So the question is, how are we going to be productive? What are our possibilities? What are our options that we can do to be productive? So here's our scenario. It's Sunday night. Okay? You have a gigantic economics test on Monday morning. So we kind of know what our first limiting factor, our first available possibility is maybe I should study. Our second is you have a soccer game on Saturday night. Okay? And you have a soccer game on Sunday night. And so the question is, how are you going to spend your time? Every Saturday night you have a club soccer, and you really, really want to get good at this. So we have a limiting factor. What am I going to do? How am I going to make these choices and split up this time? Well, if I choose practicing soccer, what is my opportunity cost? If I choose studying for a test, what is my opportunity cost? And again, remember, opportunity cost is not a financial cost. If you're saying anything that deals with $15, $20, things like that, remember, that's the wrong answer. Those are monetary costs. So the problem with this is if you say, okay, I'm going to study for a test. Well, are you really going to study the entire day? It's not an absolute. If you're going to practice for soccer, you're going to really practice soccer all day. There's 24 hours in a day. That's our limit. That is our production possibilities frontier. You're going to spend 8 hours of sleep in theory, which leaves you 16 hours to fill in the day. So how are you going to spend those 16 hours? Well, I've made a chart here for us to look at this option. So we have an activity. We have our time slots from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. And we could do the first column of activities. And you should not be writing this down, by the way. Not at least drawing the chart. That'd be ridiculous. And here you can see I study all day. And then at 7 o'clock, I practice soccer. We'll call this the Haley-Klimek schedule. Where she study, and then I'll squeeze in soccer for a little bit, and then I'm going to study afterwards. Well, that's silly. None of us are going to do that, not even Haley Klimek. So we look at our third column there that talks about our options, and you see we kind of have an alternating schedule of 3 hours of studying, 3 hours of soccer, 3 hours of studying, 3 hours of soccer, and then we kind of balance it out at the end. And what you should see is that our trade-off is obvious. For every hour that I spend studying, what do I give up? And for every hour that I spend at soccer practicing, what do I give up? And so we can make a nice little chart here. You'll see we have three options. So what you see is a vertical axis that has hours, 0, 8, and 16. And that's how much time you're going to spend studying. And on the horizontal axis, you see how much time you're going to spend practicing soccer. Again, you have 0, 8, and 16. So here's our first line. If we choose option 1, so that's how much time we're going to spend practicing soccer. That's how you read this. So let's call that about 12 hours. So you're going to spend 12 hours a day practicing soccer. Oh, I hate when my computer does this. Ignore that. You've seen it about 50 million times. Now, here we see how to read the column on the left, that vertical axis. If I'm going to choose option 1, I spend 12 hours practicing soccer, and I'm going to spend maybe about 10 hours in study. Now, this isn't a perfect example of this because I'm modifying these charts, but what we should see is this. If this is a true PPC, what I will come up with is a total of 16 hours that I could spend. Now, I have a limiting factor here of 16 total available hours. Well, if I choose option 2, you see that the number of hours I spend practicing soccer drops dramatically. But the number of hours I can spend studying rises dramatically. But I'm still limited by the total number of hours in a day that I have available, 16. Now, you could say, yeah, Mr. Colvin, I'm not going to sleep as much. Fine. All you do is change the numbers from 16 to 24 and say, all right, you're never going to sleep. You're going to spend your time practicing soccer or studying. You still are limited by that total 24 hours. Option 3 you see is we say, hey, soccer is way more important. So you're going to spend virtually 16 hours practicing soccer, and you see a dramatic cut in the time that you study. So all we want you to understand is this. For every hour that you choose something, as soon as we get to a binary or only 2 option choice, when you do option A, you lose time for option B. That's all it means. When you study more, you practice soccer less. And that's opportunity cost. Obviously, that's our trade-offs in action. That's what a PPC represents. But that's not realistic. So we have 2 charts here. We have A and B. And we see B is a point on the curve. And we say, okay, well, if I study for 8 hours and I have fun for 8 hours, fine, I've balanced it perfectly well. But then if you look at option A here, this point within the curve, what does that represent? You'll notice I'm spending less time studying and less time having fun. Well, what does that mean I'm doing? It means I'm screwing around for a bunch of hours. So not every hour of the day is spent being busy. And not every hour of the day is spent being productive. And so how much time do you spend on your phone? How much time do you spend driving from point A to point B? How much time do you spend hanging out with your friends? Think about this for soccer. Some of you play club sports, and you drive out of Hastings for those sports. Now, you have to balance the cost there, because if it's an hour practice, but you drive an hour one way to get there, now you've spent 3 hours, oh, I hate you, computer, 3 hours to get 1 hour of practice. Now, that 1 hour of practice better be better than 3 hours of practice in Hastings. Otherwise, it's not very productive. Well, maybe it is something specialized and it's worthwhile. But otherwise, you've spent 2 hours in a car. Is that productive use of your time? In the case of hockey, we always talk about this. Is it really better to go travel all over the country and play with all these different people when you could spend time in your garage stick handling? Now, it's more fun, sure, but add in the cost of time and travel, maybe it doesn't make more sense. So the reality is it's very, very difficult to be on the frontier. That's that orange line here or yellow line. It's very hard to be on that line as an individual because we need downtime. So now we get to the important question of why would you ever choose study? You notice I have on the left here, I have study, and on the bottom I have fun. So why would you choose to study? Well, you'll notice we have an original graph, original curve that's small. And let's say that that is a total of 16 hours. Well, how can I get more done? Well, let's say you are on your way to soccer practice. And so that's 3 hours of your day, but you buy a smartphone. So while you're on your phone, in the car with your parents, you're getting your homework done. Suddenly, you're doing two things at once. Now, that doesn't increase the number of hours in a day. But what it does do is it makes each of your hours more productive. So think about Schoology. Think about how I'm trying to apply this in class. I'm not giving you more hours, but I'm trying to allow you to be more productive. So we get back to this question of why would I ever study? Why wouldn't I always choose fun? Well, when you're an adult, you're going to have bills to pay. When you're an adult, you're going to have to get a house. You're going to have to get a car. You're going to have to make financial decisions. And that's all going to cut into the amount of free time you have, unless you have a job that pays you enough money to live the lifestyle you want without working a lot. So when I was bartending, I made more money per hour than I make now, for sure. I worked less hours by a long shot than I do now. But I didn't make as much total money as I do today. So the question is, how can I have as much free time as I want and still lead the lifestyle I want and have more money? Well, I went to college. So I went to college, I became a teacher, I studied, and then my starting job paid me better. And so the whole idea is that if we make good choices today, we build up capital. This is why you save money. This is why you invest. This is why you need to have some kind of a financial plan for your future. So the goal is simply to do something today that will lead to more in the future. So we talked about capital goods. And you'll notice that's what these PPC curves really get to. So now we get away from personal choices and we get back to economics. And we get back to fundamental economics, which is this. If I buy a forklift, I can lift a lot more stuff than I can with my arms. If I buy a computer, I can get a lot more stuff done. If I save money and put it in the bank and invest it in the future, I can buy more consumer goods. So I'm working very hard today so that in the future, I don't have to work as hard. So why do I spend so much time worrying about Charlie's school? Well, because I want him to have fun in the future. And I want him to be able to lead the lifestyle he wants. But I also know that if he doesn't study and invest time in himself, then he's going to have to spend more time in the future. The goal is not to work more. The goal is not to study more. The goal is to study more efficiently. The goal is not to work 100 hours a week. It's to work 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week and earn the same amount of money you would if you had to work 80 or 100. All right.